Our guest speakers, our dream team as we call them, they will each have about 20 minutes to share. They have PowerPoint slides to go over. It's really an overview. It's kind of fast and furious, but you have a notepad in your packet as well, so you can take notes. And there'll be some time for question and answer at the end. So first up, we will have our estate attorney, Jake Whitmire. Following him will be our CPA, Rick Brewster. And closing out will be our financial advisor, David Smith. So with that, Jake, are you ready to roll? Oh, that's right. Just kidding. It's Rick. Yay.
You know, I said I would like to start and just introduce the team. And the reminder is life's complicated. We go through seasons in life, and life's a moving target. So today we're going to talk about the ride. And the ride just means, you know, we've got different situations, no matter what stage of life we're in. At church, recently we had the parable from Luke chapter 12, and it's the rich fool. And what it says, it's a story told by Jesus about a wealthy man whose land produced a bumper crop. Instead of sharing his abundance, he decides to tear down his barns and build bigger ones. So American. Let's store our stuff. So his crops wanted to give him a life of ease if he built his barns bigger. God calls him a fool, and the reason he was a fool, he said, tonight you're going to die. Somebody else is going to get your stuff. What we know is that means that somebody's going to fight over your stuff. The parable serves as a warning against greed and the mistake of valuing stuff over our relationships, and specifically our relationships with God. So the Bible talks about money and stuff, and it talks about that more than heaven and hell. And it reminds us that in life, we're going to have more stumbles, more conflicts over money and stuff than we will over the rest of our life. So he wants us to prepare. It says in the Bible, seek wisdom and guidance. And what you'll find today, hopefully we give you a nugget or two of wisdom and guidance that we share in what we do. The Bible also talks on living frugally. Live on less than you make. Do it for a long time. And save for a rainy day. So some of the concepts today are more towards the end of life. Now that you've saved, now that you've accumulated some things, what are you going to do with it to be a good steward? My message for starting is it's a coordinated effort between planners. A three-legged stool is way more stable than a one-legged stool. So the three of us are working together, communicating together with you to meet your goals. We all have different levels of experience and different areas of expertise. Jake, the estate attorney, I call the protector, the director. He's going to help you honor your wishes. I'm the CPA, so the compliance side is I'll make sure you stay out of jail, you pay as little as you can, and you know the compliance side of filing your tax returns. And then David's the shepherd. The shepherd creates the wealth, guides the wealth, protects the wealth in different ways. At the very end, we're going to have a time of questions, so please write down your questions as we speak, and then at the end, we'll try to answer those questions. So thanks for coming today. Jake, you're up.
Well, good morning. I sometimes have this throwback feeling to high school when I was on the JV football team, and then I get to play on the varsity game once in a while when I get around guys that have had such great experience in life. So with estate planning, a lot of time, most of the time, is spent in kind of deciding what type of document to use. Is this on? Can you guys hear me? Okay. And there's a lot of conversation about wills versus trusts, powers of attorney, and those documents all work together. The key is we're planning for a day when one of two things or two of two things will happen. And that is 10 out of 10 people still die. Okay? Still a very valid statistic. So we know that's gonna happen. But we also wanna take some care and prepare for if we're incapacitated. And so in planning, we really have to blend those. A will, purely we look at as a Dear Judge letter. And if you boil it down, it would basically say, Dear Judge, I'm no longer living, but I've chosen this person to be in charge after I die of my estate, which your estate is everything that you own. And Judge, I want it to go to these people or these charities and in this way. Okay, so it's a Dear Judge letter. A will really won't do anything for you while you're alive, but you can modify it. If you've done one in another state, it'll be honored here in Oregon, but I would recommend getting it looked at just purely on the administrative side. There are some ways that some states set them up that make things a little bit more difficult here in Oregon. I looked at one yesterday with some people. They were from Nebraska, and I said, no, you're fine. Everything was fine. It's doing exactly what you wanted to. It's only a couple years old. But it is a good idea to make sure that that's the case. Power of attorney is purely a management tool while you're alive. So automatically, by operation of law, it expires as soon as you do. And a lot of people make that mistake. I'd say once a week, I meet with a child of someone who passed away, and that they will tell me proudly that they have power of attorney for their parents. And I'll say, but you kind of don't. And they look at me shocked. Say, what do you mean? I said, no, because that went away when they passed. But essentially, with the power of attorney, you're placing a lot of trust in a person, and you're saying, this person is able to make legal and financial decisions for me. And it can either be from now on, from the moment you sign it, or you can set it up to require some medical evaluations before it goes into effect. So those are your options. Very powerful, good tool. We commonly rely on them to make decisions and have the power of attorney sign off on vehicle titles, deal with insurance companies, utility companies, property deeds, retirement accounts, pensions. Those are all examples of where that power of attorney would come in to be able to make choices for you. Hopefully good ones. Notice the hopefully part, because you have to use some care in who you're selecting. If that person were to apply for a credit card in your name, they can do that. And I use that example because usually people are a bit tentative to allow people to have credit cards in their name. So that just generally brings up the awareness of the level of responsibility that they will have. Almost a combined matrix of those two would be what's commonly called a revocable trust. Because with a revocable trust, you can appoint a successor trustee. Your document will specify what the conditions are for when that person takes over. One, kind of a no-brainer, but it's if I die, this person's going to be the trustee. Secondarily, the document usually will have kind of an internal trigger that will say either if one doctor or two doctors or the successor trustee, but if one of those, it's usually not a combination of all of them, if they sign a written opinion that the person that set up the trust is incapacitated, they can't mentally make good financial decisions any longer, then the successor takes over, okay? Similar with the power of attorney, you can imagine in that regard, because you're really relying on that person while you're alive to make good decisions over your assets, okay? To take care of you. And their goal is to see to it that your bills are paid, maybe medical placement, decision-making, things like that will tie into that. And then usually it's the same person, not always, but usually it's the same person that will manage things after you pass away. So that trustee is then stepping into what we talked about with the will, which is, hey, you're dead, Now what do you want done with your stuff? How do you responsibly want that stewarded, okay? With a will, that would go through probate. And so probate, a lot of people, it seems like, are scared of it, but when you start to dive into why, they might not know. They just know it's like the boogeyman that hides in the closet, right? It's not the end of the world. I just tell people, if you don't have some planning in place to avoid probate, then it's the default. Okay, so it's what the state of Oregon, if you're all Oregon residents, says, hey, we're gonna run everything through the probate court. There's going to be some court oversight on how your assets are managed, and the court will appoint the person that's called in Oregon a personal representative. If you've spent time in another state, you might have heard the term executor. They're one and the same. It's just nomenclature. So Oregon, the court system will appoint a person to be in charge of the probate. And so their responsibility at that point is to sign the tax return, to liquidate the investment accounts, to see to it that your creditors and claimants are satisfied and paid off. If you had a bit of litigation going on, they're the one that is in charge of that. If there's a wrongful death claim, they're the person that's appointed that's going to be in charge of finishing that up. Sale of real estate that is not in some other way taken care of, those are all probate issues. And so in Jackson County, commonly we see probate take about 12 to 14 months if it's otherwise relatively straightforward. Things that can extend to that would be if there is a wrongful death claim. My current record is 9 years. I in no way want to break that record. That's not what I look at as a personal best. And honestly, I had nothing to do with the wrongful death claim. It was a Philadelphia attorney. But all that to say, the probate goes on and on. At some point, you get a letter from the judge that says, "Really? Is this still happening?" Yes, Judge. Pennsylvania is still handling everything on their end. And we had a total of about $43 in the probate here. But your home state is always where the probate has to happen, even if it's an asset out of state that's being dealt with. Okay? There are several ways to get around probate. So beneficiary designations, revocable trust. Some people will use a transfer on death deed, which will work for real estate sometimes. And so in legal land, it's a baby, it's an infant to me, because we like to rely on things that are hundreds of years old. The transfer on death deed in Oregon was made in 2012. So it's relatively new. There are times where it works very well, and I've had times where I looked at it and it didn't work well. So incident specific is my comment on transfer on death deed. State and federal. So this is something that has been in the news recently, that there's this tension between state government and federal government, okay? So your state of residency has a lot to do with how your estate will be settled. Federal law really has not much. The tax realm is the most significant. The remainder of the laws that will really control are by and large state laws, okay? So everything, you pay an Oregon tax here, and I'm sure that Rick will get into that in a bit. Federally, there's not a federal trust code. There's not a federal probate code. Those are all state law issues. And so you ultimately can shop for the best state that you want to have your estate handled in if you want to. I've not met anybody that's been willing to do that. I've had a lot of clients that have elected to move out of state based on the Oregon tax implications. But not saying that that's going to make at least the settlement of the estate easier. So as you're here for 71.5, I assume that you, at least in some mind, have experienced some charitable giving. There are a lot of different vehicles that can make that easier. They can diminish your estate size. And so when we were looking at the state versus federal issues, these issues are controlled both by federal and state law, okay? So some of those, charitable remainder trust, you can set up so that an asset passes to charities when you die, and you can receive some income off of that while you're alive. That will shrink the size of your estate, which is advantageous here in Oregon especially, because it'll mean essentially less estate tax to pay, okay? You can also have some interplay with some capital gains tax issues. I've had people that sold businesses and had a large income that year on a capital gain, and they offset that with setting up a charitable remainder trust. The backbone in those is always that somebody is charitably minded, okay? I've had people that have sold businesses, made a lot of money, they had no interest in charity, and so as the attorney, I have to go with the client's wishes, and I just let them know, okay, well, let's talk to the accountant about how much in taxes that's going to reflect. A charitable lead trust, similar, but in that instance, you can effectively, again, transfer an asset out of your estate, okay? And that's the whole goal with these types of charitable situations, is transfer an asset out of your estate so that estate tax doesn't get paid or it's not included as a part of your estate. And you can receive some income benefit while you're alive. Donor advised funds, some people enjoy that. My hesitation on donor advised funds is oftentimes your ability to choose who is on kind of this committee of who's in charge of it. It won't peer a long time into the future, okay? So if people as a family, they have a really good nucleus of people to make those decisions, I'd say they're a pretty good candidate in those situations for donor advised funds. But it needs to have the right players involved, okay? The decision makers. And what that is basically you can put a chunk of money aside and then you let these people make decisions on where it goes, okay? So hopefully they're like-minded. You can have them set up while you're alive, and in that regard, they're pretty cool. They can be generational in that regard. Foundations and charities. So private foundations, oftentimes, you might have seen some things in the area. In fact, we were just at the Cascade Christian High School football game, and it was at Crater High School, and underneath the scoreboard, the Arthur Dukes Foundation. So that's a foundation locally that funds a lot of community type issues. And so if you have a substantial estate, you can set up a foundation that then gets to go outlive you, basically. And again, you want to get to select who's going to run it, or maybe set up some parameters for what their qualifications are. Public charities, I'd say probably the most common that people rely on in Oregon is the Oregon Community Foundation. It works. There's some better options. So while I say that's the most relied upon, my emphasis on them is oftentimes not great. There's a really cool Christian community foundation that's available if you want to support some Christian type organizations. That operates out of, I think it's out of Seattle, and it does a really cool job. So if you have questions on that, come ask me afterwards and we'll get in touch. The last one I consider the best option, and it's oftentimes the most overlooked. I had a conversation with one of my best friends that we've been buddies literally since we were in the nursery at church together. And I know I look like I'm only 20 now, but it was a little bit longer than that ago. So his dad passed away earlier this year, and I didn't do his planning, I'm not revealing client secrets in any way. But his dad was a really cool guy, and he's left some money for some charities, but he did it through his trust instead of through his retirement account. And so when my buddy told me that, my response was, oh, dang. He went, what's wrong? Well, the difference is, in that arrangement, it makes the government a partial beneficiary when you have a taxable estate, is the way I look at it. Yeah, you had 4 kids, but you're leaving some money to your uncle, Sam, on the side that you didn't need to. So the number one place that I encourage people to be charitable is really from your retirement accounts, because those are tax deferred. And so if you take the money out while you're alive, you'll pay income tax. I bet that Rick's gonna tell you about a cool tool to avoid that scenario. But the one that I focus most on is if you die and you have a retirement account, your named people that are beneficiaries on that, usually children, they have to pay income tax, and they only have 10 years to get it out. So oftentimes, somebody that's maybe in their 50s or early 60s, they inherit a retirement account, and they're really at the top end of their earning years. And now the government says, oh, and by the way, you have to take that money out of that retirement account and pay tax on it in that same overlapping period. So it can result in this really big tax. So yes, oh, she's gonna get the hook here in a minute.
I thought she was correcting you, didn't
I did, well, I thought she had a question. So with your IRAs, my emphasis is do your charitable giving from there first. And then if that still hasn't fulfilled the amount of charitable giving you want to do, cool. Then move on and do it from either your will or your trust. But oftentimes people have these big buckets of retirement money. That money passes to the charity tax-free. So that's the big difference, okay? Whereas if it goes to your kids, they pay income tax on it. If it goes to a charity, no tax. That's a big untapped piece of the puzzle. So documentation, you're either gonna need to have a written and properly executed will or trust and power of attorney. There are state-specific requirements for how that's done. Notice if you ever look up the code, you will never see that it has to be done by an attorney, okay? You can practice law yourself. Now, my doctor says that I can also practice medicine by myself, and I choose not to, but that's just my choice. I leave that up to you. But as long as the documents are done correctly, it's perfectly okay. I'm gonna skip down to the bottom just in the interest of not getting hooked off the podium. So multiple beneficiaries. One thing to consider is if you're naming family members as beneficiaries, you want to be sure that they are mature enough for the money. Notice maturity sometimes comes with age, sometimes it doesn't. But you don't want to leave money to somebody that isn't well suited to deal with it. And by that I mean sometimes we have people that have addiction issues. And if you leave them a chunk of money, it could really hurt them or kill them. With your documents, it's a good idea to keep that in mind. Maybe they just are not good spenders. Maybe they're in a rocky marriage, and if you leave them money, that son-in-law or daughter-in-law is going to get a chunk of it. And this would apply whether it's grandkids or children. But just keep a guarded eye on the maturity of those beneficiaries. And sometimes it changes. Sometimes it, all of a sudden they wake up when they hit 25, the brain's fully developed, and you're just shocked by how mature they are. Sometimes they're 40, and you're still waiting for that light to come on. And both of those are okay as far as, I just like people to be realistic in their expectation of, okay, what's the likelihood? If this person inherits a chunk of money, is it going to help them? Maybe not. But there are some kind of guardrails that we can also put on the money as to you're able to have perhaps somebody as a trustee manage it for them, and they can treat it like a spigot rather than a fire hose. So they could get a little bit of money over a longer period of time. Or you could say, no, they can have the whole dump truck and get the whole thing. Okay. I'm guessing I'm out of time now.
Right on schedule.
And as I said, my side is more compliance. And so we talk about taxes. What's an accountant do for estates and beneficiaries? We generally do their final 1040, their final tax return. Oregon has a law that says if somebody dies in Oregon with $1 million or more, there's an Oregon inheritance tax. Under the one big beautiful bill, doesn't that just roll off your tongue? OB3, you can have $15 million before you have a taxable estate, or close to that next year. So we really don't have a lot of estates that have $30 million. So generally you can plan around the federal law. Oregon's the one we have to deal with. After a person dies, let's say that we end up with a pot of money that we're gonna dole out to a beneficiary. There's a tax return, it's a fiduciary return that continues reporting on those assets as they're given out. So that's part of what an accountant does. Our goal is to reduce taxes, keep more of what you make. We give during our life, and we give a lot of ways. Sometimes it's out of our paycheck, sometimes we give stuff, sometimes we give of our time. We provide for our families. You know, maybe providing education so they can make a good living. So we're paying for that. It may be their needs, medical needs, a safe house, a safe car, because they don't have reliable places to live and things to drive. Sometimes they're entrepreneurial and they need a business, and you can help them with your money to get into business. These days, that's a great way to make a living. We're setting aside resources generally for when we cannot or choose not to work. We don't want to be a burden on somebody else. And many of you were brought up, you got to pay your own way in life, son, you know? And so that's part of what we do. We accumulate resources for a rainy day and emergencies and for some later time. Many times, the way we do that is with retirement accounts. So the best tool in the tool chest, in my opinion, is what do you do with your retirement account? We're going to talk a little bit about qualified charitable distributions, that's QCDs. Remember, when you're 73, now you have to start drawing on your IRAs. You've waited all your life to draw on your retirement, and now the government says you have to start drawing. It's generally about 4% of the fair market value, but sometimes it's a point in life that I don't need the money. You know, I've got 4% of a big number that I don't have to, you know, deal with. There's a zillion kinds of IRAs, and all but 2 of those on that list are tax deferred, which means if I draw it out, I pay tax on it. If I leave it to my kids, they pay tax on it. The only 2 that are not is the Roth and the backdoor Roth. The Roth is an after-tax product that just says, I'm going to pay the tax and put it in this account, and I'm going to watch it grow. And if I'm young and in a low bracket, Roths are very effective because there's another bucket to draw out of that I can balance my tax bracket. A rollover IRA might be wherever you worked over the years, they had a pension plan. And that pension plan was tax deferred, but when you separate from employment, you're going to roll that over and you're going to direct it yourself. So that rollover IRA is just a product of a company retirement plan rolled over. There's many ways to give charitably from your retirement account. My favorite's the top left corner, qualified charitable distributions. I'll go a little bit more into detail in a little bit on how do I do a QCD, what can I do, how do I set it up. The other thing you can do charitably is I can just change my beneficiary. If I have my 3 kids as beneficiaries and I decide that I'm going to give a quarter of my IRA to charity, I just add a 4th beneficiary and just change it to not 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. I just change the beneficiary to give it partially to charity. If the kids are nasty, I'm gonna give the whole thing to charity. You can set up more complicated strategies like a charitable remainder trust. The most important thing with estate planning, I think, is that top right corner, which is, what do I leave to who? If your estate is large enough, you get to pick and choose, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. Bottom left, the other thing that we do is every year is not the same. In your example of a donor advised fund, if you had a big event, you sold a rental, you sold a business, you inherited something and it's big taxable income year, you can bunch that year and take more charitable donations. We pointed out that all the states are different, and depending on where you live, you'll be taxed differently. If you live in Washington or Nevada or Florida or Texas or one of the tax haven states, they don't have an income tax. So a lot of people, when they retire, they move to that state. They don't pay 9% of their retirement distributions, to Oregon. But you gotta live in that state. You gotta wanna live there. I always say my kids and grandkids live here. It's likely I'm gonna live here and pay Oregon tax. Legacy planning. For tax efficiency in choosing who gets what, it's really important that you understand that if I leave it to charity, nobody pays tax on that. So IRAs are ordinary income. Inherited IRAs have a 10-year stretch, which means I have to take all of it out during 10 years. Jake already pointed out that a lot of times those heirs are in the highest tax bracket they'll ever be because they're in their highest income earning years. The other reminder on the bottom is, IRAs are part of their estate and subject to Oregon income tax for estate. It's over $1 million, Oregon gets at least 10% of that. But it's also subject to income tax. So it's kind of double tax, one tax for estates and one tax as people draw it out. So why do I like IRAs going to charity? They don't pay tax. I choose other assets to leave to heirs because it's stepped up in basis, which means there's a new cost on stocks, land, rentals, houses. So inherited property that I have other than IRAs are generally no gain when they sell them. If you rearrange it in the estate and give out money, there's no tax. There is tax deferral on several products. One is an IRA, annuities, and installment sales. If I was paying tax on it during my lifetime as I draw it out, and I leave it to my kids, they have to pay tax on it just the same. So those kind of products are good to leave to charity. Roth IRAs are non-taxable. Life insurance generally is non-taxable. So those are good things to leave to heirs. We talked about implementation. How do I do this? I look at my beneficiaries. I may split accounts and say, this account is going to be for Johnny and this one's going to be for Jimmy. I can even use a charitable remainder trust as an IRA beneficiary, and I can actually stretch the 10 years over a longer period of time, depending on the term of that charitable remainder trust. So they're going to get the money, but they're going to get it over a longer period of time. A lot of people use life insurance. That ILIT term is irrevocable life insurance trust, and I can give them life insurance proceeds and give the IRA to charity. I can use a donor advised fund, but I can't use donor advised funds for my qualified charitable distributions because that's not allowed. So considerations. We've all picked up after estates, and we know, some of the problems is communication. So we got to communicate with the client, and we got to communicate with their heirs. We got to coordinate, what they want so we can accomplish their wishes. We have to look at beneficiary designations. If they formed a trust, did they really put things in the trust? Your house doesn't look like it's in your trust. Oh yeah, I put it in the trust. Jackson County doesn't know you put it in the trust. So we want to make sure their wishes match their will and trust, and their assets are funded correctly. Most people, I say, look at it every 5 years, because you update it every 5 years to see if anything in life has changed, and after any major event, birth, death, disability, retirement, whatever. So the documentation. Jake, has picked up after people that are very organized. Jake helped us with my parents' estate, and he made our life way easier, and I just appreciate that. But keeping your documentation straight, if you're an organized person, keep it organized. I like a letter of instruction, explaining your charitable intentions. Who is this for? So the beneficiaries know you're not getting it all. I choose to leave 30% to XYZ charity. I like to have a family meeting if you can, and have, explain the situation so there's not talk behind the table. I like it when they heard it directly from mom. I like it when they saw it in mom's handwriting. I just want less surprises. There's enough family dynamics after somebody passes that try to avoid that. Qualified charitable distributions. Again, it was set up in 2006 by the Pension Protection Act. It was a temporary measure, but it's extended several times. It's made permanent now, but it continues to wiggle a little bit. It's indexed for inflation. They started out with, you can give away $100,000 per year per person out of your retirement account. So when it started, you could give, as a couple, $200,000 directly out of your IRA to charity. It's indexed for inflation, so it's 108 this year, 111,000 each next year. It's a giant number. There's some requirements. You got to be a certain age. You got to be the right kind of accounts. We talked a little bit about the annual limits. It's got to be direct from the IRA to charity, and we'll talk about how it's setting it up. It does satisfy that 4% required minimum distribution. When you're 73, it's about 4%. When you're 80, it's about 5%. When you're 90, it's about 10%. But all the actuarial numbers say, if you're that age, you're going to live to almost 100. The longer we live, the longer we're expected to live. So the QCD satisfies your RMD. It's not part of your income. And you gave it to somebody you like. It reduces our AGI calculation, because if I don't take the required minimum distributions, it helps me with our medical thresholds. It does affect the charitable thresholds. It helps IRMA. IRMA is a term that says, I get to charge you for Medicare based on your adjusted gross income. If you sell a rental, 2 years later, you're going to pay double the Medicare, rate, triple the Medicare rate, just because you made money a couple of years ago. That's IRMA. It benefits people that take the standard deduction. So for a married couple over 65, it's about $34,000 standard deduction. If I give it direct out of my IRA, then I get that on top of that standard deduction for a joint return. Let's see. It's got to be to a 501c3 organization. There's some organizations that aren't eligible. A donor advised fund, a private foundation, charitable gift annuity or charitable remainder trust are not eligible. You can't give to those out of your IRA. I guess the considerations. When I do your taxes, what happens? I get a 1099-R, and that says you took a distribution out of your IRA. From that, I can't tell whether you kept it or gave it away. So keep a trail, of how much of that required minimum distribution did you give direct to charity. You can start giving it 70.5. Save your receipts. Look at your IRA transfers, because it's the date it clears, not the date the check is written. Some people use it to fulfill a pledge. I'm going to give you $100,000, $20,000 a year, and then they take that out of their IRA, or recurring annual gifts. Let's see. We talked about bunching. Bunching means I'm going to give bunches this year and a little less next year. So they give every other year. The timing of when I give is important, because I may want to give a big year-end donation because this year I need that deduction. I think, are we getting close on time? Okay. So what I like is, again, the legacy IRA is, how can I make a difference? I want to give to charity what will make a difference. I want to give to my kids, what's left after tax. So I may be splitting those gifts between things. I think I can stop right there and we can pass it on to David Smith. There will be questions at the end, so please write down your questions and the panel will try to answer those.
Thank you, Rick. Well, I just want to say that all this information right here is stuff that we get.
Is there a green light?
So it should be on, okay.
He's on.
He's not holding it close enough, I guess. So what we have to do is take this information that they've given you, and now we gotta, as Rick would use as a shepherd, we gotta keep it in the right fence around it, okay? So one of the things that
Right side.
there we go. So when we do this, when I sit down with people and say in the financial plan, the first thing we do is take a financial physical of all your assets that you have out there. We also take and have, what are your goals? What are your desires to put in place? And so I always say this, if we write these down, they become much more real than if we just talk about them. And so that should be in the financial planning process. Your charitable giving is one of those goals, and you need to have a plan for it. Most of us come in, we're great savers for the most part. We make this money, we give to charities as we go along through life. But then we get to the end of it, I find a lot of my clients, they got one of the big things, this big old IRA over here, and they know how to save all the time, but they have a hard time taking money from it. We have to make that mental shift because we've worked for 30, 40 years of saving, and now we got this thing where they say, I gotta spend it. And it was okay, I'm 59 and a half, I can take it when I want it. Then all of a sudden it was 70 and a half, and I have to take it, now it's 73, and I gotta take money out every year. It's like, why? So you have this thing, one of the things we do basically is say, how are you gonna set your money up in a planned delivery? You're gonna come back in here and put into your cash flow or over a lifetime. Or you're gonna do a testamentary at the end of your life. Do we wanna give it to them as we go through life with the ministries we're working with? Or do we just wait till we die and give it to them? Or both? I think one of the things you'll see, we do so much IRA distributions for those people that 73 and older today, or started when they were 70 and a half and the law was still there. And they basically give their money away, their RMDs, they don't even want it. A lot of clients, they don't need it between the great incomes they have. And they'll send that to charities for all the reasons that Rick has talked about, just saving them on the taxes. So you need to sit down and say, how do I want to give my assets? Some people, they're making all that decision on their self. Other people are making it with their spouse. So you need to have a written plan on how you want to give things away to the different charities you want to have. And you want to make sure that it doesn't impact your retirement so much that you are going hungry. So it's a balance you had. Just like when you were growing up and earning money and spending it, and you gave a portion of your income to charities, whether it's a church or other, oh, there we go, or other ministries. You have to set up a management style to manage these charitable vehicles, whether all the different vehicles that Rick and Jake talked about, they all have to have their own investment. If you have a charitable remainder trust, let's be an investment policy with that, because you have a stream of income coming out, but then you want to have money at the end of that to go to the charity. There's some restrictions in that. You also have the diversification aspect. You know, a lot of clients I'll have come in, they have a highly appreciated stock that they've owned for a long time. And they don't want to pay taxes on that. So they put it into a charitable remainder trust. They're not going to leave it in that asset because it's not diversified. It's not got a good plan. It's not going to generate income plus pay out to the charity. So they then have to build an investment strategy around that. What's your blood pressure? when it comes to investing. Well, you're going to have that same strategy with the giving that you're going to have, whether it's a donor fund, whether it's given out of your IRA, you're going to have that same strategy. And so you're going to need to sit down and say, what charities do I want to support? At my local church, and then there's a whole bunch of them. And I was just listening earlier this morning to Perry, and they've got some big luncheon going on over at their place because they got all these different charities. Start naming off the number, and they're going to have 100 people there. And I'm thinking, wow, that's a lot of people. That our community has charities, good charities that we can donate. I'm partial to 71.5, but that's me. So we want to build a plan that allows that giving to maintain itself so we can continue it. And you have to be able to write these goals down and come back and say, this is what we want to do. You're going to involve your other professionals with someone like me, and you're going to make sure that we're online to go down the road together so that we can take care of these goals. So creating that giving timeline. When do we want to give the money? How long do we want to give it? So we go through that process. And so people got to be able to say, I want to give this away and have a plan to that. And kind of draft that plan out, have goals of how you want to support. And maybe today you're going through the process and you want to say, I want to give to these different people above my church, these different charities. And so you go through that process, and then you grow, you change, you follow those charities, and make sure they line up with your demands in your life. And you got to review it on a regular basis. I mean, all of these documents we've talked about are what I call living documents. They can change. Your goals can change. Your ministry approach can change. And so what you want to do is have a written process of what you want to do, and you review it on a regular basis. You treat it just like going to the doctor and getting your checkup, all right? And you need to, if you have a trust, you want to make sure you review that on a regular basis with your attorney. You want to make sure that, what's my tax situation if I go to sell something? I never have a client that comes in to sell an asset without talking with their other professionals to make sure that we don't have an unforeseen tax, because I don't always trust the client to tell me what their cost basis is. So we need to make sure that we're being informed in that. And basically, how do we do this in a way that it fits into the rest of my life? If we want to be a good steward of what God has given us, then we need to be able to have it written down how we're going to do this. We need to review with the council that he's put in our place. We need to make sure that we take care of that, because we've all been gifted with something. It's just a matter of we remember who gifted it to us and take care of it from that standpoint so that we can go out and make sure that it's being good stewardship in using it.
Good morning. Thanks for coming. I'm Bud Amundsen. I'm the Executive Director of Youth 71.5 Ministries, and grateful that you're here. Also, just want to say again, thank you to our professionals. These guys have years of experience, and they're volunteering their time to help us be good stewards, and they are also very tied into the mission of 71.5. So we are super grateful, so thank you very much. At 71.5, we have a message map that talks about, we all know how young people are dealing with anxiety, possibly loneliness, or they're bored. Thank you. That was, and then we like to say 71.5 helps with that. Well, in this context, all of us need to be good stewards. All of us have tax burdens, and all of us have a desire to help kids hear the gospel. Well, 71.5 helps with that. And so that's where our mission is stated, that we exist to share God's story of hope with young people through trusting relationships in any relevant way. So as we move into the future, there's two things I'm very confident about. One is our society will continue to produce kids that need to know about Jesus. And number two, that mission of sharing God's story of hope with young people through trusting relationships, and those being the bridge to the gospel, that's never going to go out of style. And so in that light, I'm asking that you would consider putting 71.5 into your estate plan. And that's where we can accomplish good things long into the future in the lives of young people and bring the hope through Jesus to those young people and continue to make an everlasting, eternal difference. So thank you. Thanks for coming. I think we're going to able to hang out here for a couple minutes. So yeah, if you have another question or want to get more information about 71.5, we're here to chat. So thank you.